can get started. Um, so again, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, As-salatu was-salam ala Rasulil Ameen, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much. Jazakumullahu khairan for joining us. My name is Adnan. I am with Bridging Gaps Foundation. We are a Dawah organization and a registered non-profit organization in the province of British Columbia here in Canada. Alhamdulillah, we've had the fortunate experience of learning from Sheikh Moutasem and benefiting from him through many different events that we have conducted. At this webinar and the upcoming course on the names and attributes of Allah, which starts next weekend, are just a continuation of our relationship with Sheikh Moutasem and series of events that we are putting out in hopes that it will connect people's hearts back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and allow us to become individuals and Muslims who enter a state of ihsan eventually, inshallah. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the platform to our dear Sheikh Moutasem, and get started with this webinar. Once again, please keep your mics muted. I will send out some instructions about Q&A sessions through the chat. Participants are not able to chat amongst each other at this point in time. So all your questions would come straight to me as the host, and I will share it with the Sheikh during the Q&A session, which will be towards the end of the program. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan, Brother Adnan. May Allah reward you. And welcome everyone. And I hope, inshallah, you will find this webinar to be of benefit and enjoyment at the same time. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin al-Nabi al-Amin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een wa ba'du. So welcome to this webinar on knowing the names and attributes of Allah, or actually knowing Allah closely. And there's a reason why we gave it this title. So inshallah, we will not waste time with introductions. We'll try to jump right in. And the reason this webinar was called Knowing Allah Closely, because there are so many ways you can actually know Allah, and not all of them lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So we are trying to explore a way to know Allah in a way that you feel the closeness, you feel personal closeness and relationship with Allah. And this is exactly what Iman actually gives, because any other way that you connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it does not feel personally close, then there is something you need to fix about the relationship. So let me take you first with, let's start with a story. And this is this is a story that really, when I first read it, it made me think for such a long time and reflect on my relationship with Allah. And it really helped a lot. So it was a catalyst, I would say, for improving my relationship with Allah. There's a mic, so if that could be muted. Yeah. So please, everyone, please keep your mic muted so that inshallah we don't have any disturbance. Okay. So this story really was a catalyst in I would say, hopefully, improving my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making it more personal, more meaningful, more profound, and more rewarding. And this is why the subtitle of this webinar is moving from knowing about Allah to knowing Allah. And inshallah, we will explain in detail what this actually means. So let's start with the story. There was a man, and that's the righteous and the lion. There's a man called Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Farqad. He was in the early times of Islam, maybe time of a tabi'een or just after a tabi'een. So within the 100 years after the passing of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. Now, this man used to take part in military expeditions that were organized, obviously, by the Muslim Caliphate at the time. So he would go on these military expeditions, and every time a military group had Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Farqad, they had this man with them, they would actually not bother so much about guarding their group at night, because this man was known to stay up, pray at night for the whole hours of the night until Fajr time. So if there were any emergency, he would actually wake them up. He would first deal with it, and then he would notify them. So pretty much people knew that after Salat al-Isha, the man would stand up, take to the side of the camp, stand up and engage in his Salah. And he would be in a completely different world. Now, this is something we have to know about the Middle East and North Africa at the time. There was a lot of wildlife at the time. So there were actually prey animals. There were lions, there were tigers, there were cheetah, etc. So different types of prey animals. It wasn't as it is today. So a lot of the wildlife was actually exterminated. So at the time, wild animals were real danger. So one day when the soldiers or that group were ready for camping, preparing themselves after praying Isha, this man had already started his prayer, and they heard something like a lion, like a roar, and they thought, wow, there's a lion around. So everyone started to seek shelter. This man had already started his Qiyam al-Layl, his night prayer, and he remained praying his night, even though the roaring sound was getting closer. Some of those in their hide were observing him from a distance, and they were getting worried for him. Eventually, no lion came about, the roaring sound went away, and everyone felt safe. They came out of their hide. And then, when this man finished the 2 rak'ah that he was praying, they asked him, like, are you crazy? Like, weren't you scared of a lion? And his answer is the part of the story that really got me thinking. He said, Wallahi inni la astahyi min Allah an akhafa ahadan siwah. He says, I feel so shy. I feel so shy of Allah that I fear something else. He says, I'm too shy in the presence of Allah to allow fear to come into my heart when I am in the presence of Allah. That's what he was saying. And I thought, subhanallah, look at this man. Like, it was not like the man was experiencing Allah in his life. Like, it was real. The relationship was like, Allah was so real in his experience, not just a thought, not just an idea. This was a real experience. And again, let me give an analogy. If it is as if you are actually sitting with someone and you're having a proper conversation with them, this person is real and the conversation is real, and you are experiencing at a visceral level, meaning you're experiencing it in your body. You're having a real experience. You're not imagining, you're not thinking, you're not remembering the past, you're not rehearsing the future. You're actually engaged, fully engaged at a personal level with this person. Now, this man, when he was praying, he was actually engaged with Allah, to the fact Allah was so present in his life that he felt so shy. He felt so shy that his attention could turn to something else other than Allah. That something as serious as a lion being around, as a prey animal being around, he felt shy that this should capture his attention and take it away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I thought at that time, why couldn't I experience my relationship with Allah at that level? Why couldn't it be that Allah could be so real in my life, could be so real to me, my experience with him could be so real that I experienced something similar to that? Why? So that led to a lot of research, and that led to a lot of investigation. And subhanAllah, I remember this segment of divine hadith Qudusi, that occurs in Sahih al-Bukhari, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about his awliya. Allah talks about the people that he loves. Allah says, and when my servant draws to me by a handspan, like a short distance, I will come near to him. I will come nearer to him by an arm's length. I will come closer to him more than, I will take an advancement towards him more than he did to me. And then if وَإِن أَتَانِي يَمْشِي أَتَيْتُهُ هَرْوَلًا, and if my servant comes to me walking, I will come to him running. And I thought, subhanallah, that's a real experience. You are engaged with Allah at a personal level. That's a real experience. Now, I compare this to how my experience had been in the past. It was mainly ideas. I was just learning about Allah. I was learning Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. He's Ar-Rabb, He's the Lord, right? He's Al-Aziz, the Mighty. And He's a Sami' al-Basir. He sees everything. He watches everything. But these were ideas. And the amount of impact they had in my life was very minimal. It was all in my head. It was all ideas. But in my real experience, my visceral experience, the experience I had in my gut, it was different. These meanings did not seep into my gut experience, and they did not become personal to me. So they were ideas, they were mental constructs. So when I read this hadith, and I thought, that's a real thing. Allah is talking about a real phenomenon, that when you draw nearer to Allah, He draws even nearer to you. That's real. You come to Allah walking, Allah comes to you at a faster speed. So I thought to myself, I really need Allah to come more into my life. I need to wake up to experience Allah, to experiencing Allah in my life, rather than just entertain ideas, memorize some meanings and some concepts. I want it to be a very personal experience. So that led to more research and trying to understand and relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. So here, let's move into seeing what are the levels of engagement with the names of Allah. And the reason I use the word engagement is because I don't want to use learning, because learning indicates, at least in our common use of the language, it indicates that it's an intellectual exercise, is that it's all in the head, it's all about ideas, it's all about mental constructs. So I learn about Allah, I just process information, I absorb some kind of information. So I use the word engagement because it's more general in that sense. So let's look at the different levels of engaging with the names of Allah. Number one, engaging with the words. And that's where I would say a great majority of people, actually, that's where they engage with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for them, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, "Inna lillahi tis'atan wa tis'ina isman man ahsaha dakhala al-jannah." There are 99 names of Allah. Whoever makes ihsa of them, counts them, that's the literal meaning, then this person would enter paradise. So some people think, okay, there are 99 names of Allah. I need to learn them. Allah, Ar-Rabb, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. So people just learn the words. People learn the words or memorize them and say, I know the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a great deal of people, for them, that's it. That's it. Now, there is a more advanced level, and there is a good number of people who actually go there, and that's to investigate and learn the linguistic meaning of each word. So those who engage at the first level with the words, they might know the very basic meaning of Ar-Rahman. Yeah, he's the merciful. Ar-Rahim, okay, he's the compassionate. The Al-Basir, he's the all-seeing. Okay, that's just words and meanings. But a more advanced level is when people start to go more into the linguistic meaning of those words. What does it mean to be Rahim? What's the meaning of Rahmah? What's the meaning of mercy? So he's the merciful. What does that mean? Like linguistically, I start to investigate or explore the meaning a little bit deeper. That's a linguistic exercise or endeavor. That's actually better than the first level, but still, it's not enough. Now, there are people who go even further, and they start learning or studying the rules that govern how we deal with the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the names and attributes of Allah mean what they mean. We have to accept them at the literal meaning. Another rule is that we do not make any kind of resemblance or draw parallels between the creation and Allah. So Allah is As-Sami'ul Basir, Allah is the all-hearer, the all-seer. we do not say that the way Allah sees is just like humans see, or Allah's sight is not we say it's not comparable to the sight of humans, and so on and so forth. So these are rules that keep us on the right track when it comes to learning and applying and relating to the names and attributes of Allah. And it's a minority who actually usually go into this level. They learn this as an intellectual or academic engagement. That's great. But again, that's not enough, because personally, that's what I did for many years, but I did not have a personal realization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my life. So I was not happy with that. I felt there was something missing. So what we want to do, and that's what we want to introduce in this webinar, and inshallah in the upcoming course starting next Saturday, is to move even higher level to a more advanced level, and that's about personal engagement, personal involvement with the names of Allah, where you start to have a very unique personal experience with Allah. You experience Allah at a personal level. That's actually possible. And I know for some people, this is like, maybe it's an inappropriate use of words, like have a personal experience or experience Allah in your life. And that's because we are so stuck in our heads. We limit Allah to being an idea that we learn about, but we're not allowing our hearts to connect to Allah. Our hearts experience Allah. Our hearts feel the presence of Allah. They feel the closeness of Allah. There's communication between your hearts and Allah, between your heart and Allah. The communication between you and Allah does not go through your mind, does not go through ideas. It goes through realities of the heart, realities of faith. And that's what we want to get into. So this is why this webinar came about, and along with the subsequent course, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So let's explore why we want to study the names of Allah, why we want to explore them, and why do we want to engage with them? What are the fruits and the benefits that we get out of this? So the first benefit, I would say, when we engage with the names of Allah at a personal level and start learning them properly, we will come to a realization, and it's a personal realization. It's through your personal experience with these names that everything in existence is a manifestation of the names of Allah. So the reason there is a universe, the reason there are creatures, the reason there are planets, the reason there are laws of physics, the reason there are all this natural phenomena that we see around, all of that is an outcome of the names and attributes of Allah. Allah is Al-Khaliq, so you have all of these things created, coming into existence, because the name of Allah is Al-Khaliq. He's the creator. And events happen in your life. Your life unfolds in a certain way. There is qadr, there is a plan, there is a script for your life, and your life is unfolding according to that plan or script. Exactly. And the reason this is happening is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who wrote down the qadr, who wrote down everything before it took place. Allah wrote all the details. And when you try to understand the events in your life and the things that happen maybe in your life or in other people's lives, they are a reflection of Allah being the all-knowing, Al-Alim, and Allah being Al-Hakim, the all-wise, and Allah being Al-Adl, just and fair, and Allah being the Almighty. He is in charge of everything. He has the power. He has power over everything. So the world as we know it is merely a reflection. It's an outcome of the names and attributes of Allah. So when you start to experience the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at a personal level, you will start to trace everything you come across in your life, whether it's a personal experience or it is something that you see or hear or relate to. You can start tracing it back to Allah. And you know what's interesting about this? Something very profound happens if you do that with beautiful, good intention. you will start actually to you start to realize that life is a conversation between you and Allah. So what comes from Allah, it's communication between you and Allah. Communication from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to you in the form of everything that happens in your life. So everything in your life has meaning. It's communication from Allah. It comes into your life. And it has meaning, and you are meant to connect to this meaning, grasp it, and then respond to it, just as a conversation. You're having a conversation with someone, you're chatting with someone, they say something, you respond to what they said because you understood it, and then you process it, you process that, and then you are responding to this person. So now your life is actually a conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's communication from Allah towards you. Anything that happens, an event, an incident, a specific experience in your life, you start to trace it back to Allah as a communication. Then you will your heart, and because you're connecting to Allah through your heart, now you have an understanding of what that means. So you respond. You have a communication from your side. You respond to Allah. So that's a very profound experience to have. And when you enter that state, the beautiful thing is you don't have to remind yourself of Allah. You don't have to say, oh, I have to sit and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah is already present in your experience. Allah is already with you. You are tracing everything back to Allah. So there's no need to bring Allah to your attention. There's no need to bring the mention of Allah to your consciousness. Allah is already with you. You're functioning from that paradigm completely. So this is how profound it is when you start to see that, you start to realize and see the fact that everything in existence actually comes from the names and attributes of Allah. So when the calamity hits, you will develop a better insight. You will not look at the calamity and the pain of it. You will actually see beyond that, where is this coming from? And it would not be conjecture. You would not be guessing. It's not guesswork. It's actually, you start to develop, because the connection with Allah becomes more intimate. You start to see the positive back end of every experience. So that's number one. Number two, which the first one leads to, is you'll start to see the full context of existence. So instead of looking at the physical, perceptual reality around you, yes, you will see trees, houses, sky, earth, animals, etc. You will see events happening, and you will be going through them. That's perceptual reality. And that's a very basic, I would say, layer of reality. There are deeper layers of reality. And when you connect personally to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be able to see through this thin veil of perceptual reality. Life will start to make more sense. You'll start to see a bigger context, which is more meaningful, which makes a lot of sense. And then you will start to relate to life at a deeper level. You will start, many people are conditioned to see life in a negative, or their life conditions in a negative, in a negative sense, or in a negative light, as if life is working against them. Now, when you develop this full context, you see beyond this layer of physical reality, you start to trace that back to Allah, you will start to notice that actually life works for you. And life is actually, you are being cherished, you are being even pampered in this life, you're taken care of. But you cannot see that if you are caught up completely in the thin layer of perceptual reality. And what this leads to, which is number three, when you engage with Allah and the world at this level, your life, you'll start to uncover a sense of meaning in your life. You realize that you are not here in this world randomly. You did not come about by chance. And that things and events that happen in your life, even the smallest incidents, they are not random. They are arranged according to a perfect plan. You'll start to see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, إِنَّا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَاهُ بِقَدَرٍ. Everything we created it according to precise measure. So there is nothing random in your life. There's no mistakes in your life. Nothing that happens in your life surprises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah wrote that down in the first place and He allows it to come into being. Allah creates it into being, into existence. So now your life will be more meaningful because you will start to see everything, every part, every small thing in your life is actually meaningful. And this will help you to realize and connect, or I would say uncover, the meaning of your life and what you are supposed to do with your life. And that's extremely satisfying and gratifying. And so where does all of this lead? You'll be surprised that as you work on these things, you work on experiencing Allah personally in your life, that your worship becomes way more meaningful. That when you stand up in prayer, you're not just doing an obligation. You're not taking that off your shoulder, or it's an obligation, I have to get rid of it. This actually will change. It will be a completely different change. You will start to realize that when I pray, I am actually engaged with, I'm responding to some of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of them is closeness. You will start to experience that Allah is with you, really. You'll feel His closeness in your heart. You will feel it, that He is with you. You'll start to experience that at a visceral level. Again, in your heart, in your gut, you will feel the closeness of Allah. It will be a reality, not a thought, not an idea, not imagination, but a real experience in your heart. So when you engage in salah, you realize that you are responding to Allah's closeness by bringing your full attention to Him. You're bringing your full consciousness in His presence, and you are going to have a conversation, because inshallah, as we will be explaining in the course, the upcoming course, that one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is His responsiveness. Allah responds. It's like your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is two-way. It's a two-way communication. There's back and forth. And if you are open and if you are willing to connect to Allah, you can actually experience the response from Allah to what you put forth. And you'll start to feel this continuous stream of communication. So when you stand up in salah, for example, you realize that you are engaging with Allah being al-Mujib, that Allah is the one who answers, Allah is the one who responds. And salah becomes more engaging, becomes more meaningful. And you realize that everything you do for the sake of Allah is that when you do that, you're actually responding to some of the names of Allah. So when you pray, you realize you're responding to the name of Allah, Allah, the proper name of Allah, Allah, who is the one to be worshipped, the only one to be worshipped, the only one who's worshipped in truth. And what that boils down to, the meaning of worship boils down to love. You are absorbed in the love of Allah, and you express that love of Allah by standing in His presence, by having a moment of, I would say, heightened responsiveness and communication between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you are engaged in the prayer. So what you will start to realize, that every act of worship you do actually comes from your willingness to respond to Allah. And when you do that, by the way, you don't think about intention. You don't have to engineer your intention, because your intention, intention is required when you are unconscious. But when you are connected to Allah at that level of awareness and that level of personal connection, you don't need to bring intention, because you're already acting from that desire to connect to Allah. And that's what pure intention really is. So you don't have to engineer it in your head and you start thinking. And this is something we will deal with in the course, inshallah. Many people think about intention. They think intention is just an idea. No, intention is in the heart. It's an experience. It's where you're coming from. So without knowing the names of Allah and the attributes of Allah, without connecting to them at an intimate level, without experiencing them personally, deep in your heart, it's very hard even to develop good intention, because intention will end up being a mental construct, and that's not what intention. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he actually highlights this point. He says, don't think that intention is that you say to yourself, I want to pray for the sake of Allah. I'm going to offer this prayer to Allah, or for the sake of Allah. He says, this is hadithun nafs. He says, this is an inner conversation in your head. That's not intention. Intention is something that develops naturally within you when you are connected to Allah. So you want to express it. You want to act upon it, and that moves you forward, that gets you to respond, that gets you to initiate something like a prayer or a fast or remembrance of Allah, dhikr, etc. That's automatically, the intention is already there. So it's not a matter of just, changing ideas. Yeah, just change an idea. I want to do this thing maybe just because I have to. No, I'm going to do it because I want to do it for the sake of Allah. That's just an idea. It's not an intention. So these are some of the fruits and benefits that we can actually reap if we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at this personal level. As I said, it's full personal involvement. So the question here is, why don't we usually benefit from studying Allah's names and attributes? There are many people, and probably you know some of them. Maybe you are one of them. You actually studied the name. Maybe you read a book on the names of Allah and His attributes. Or maybe you took a course. Or maybe you heard something in a khutbah. Or maybe you were reading Quran and you came across the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you've learned, maybe you've learned the rules of dealing with the names and attributes of Allah. But again, you did not experience them. They did not have a profound impact. They did not change who you are. They did not bring you back home, back to Allah. So why is this? We have to highlight this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us two devices within ourselves. There is our thinking, this intellectualism, logical thinking, ideas, mental activity. Okay, this is where we process ideas. This is where we understand math, physics, history, geography, medicine. We understand it here. That's the technical knowledge. It's more like a computer. And most of us today, especially with civilization and the distractions and the influx of information, most of us are stuck in our heads. We think we experience things only in our heads. We try to render everything into an idea. We think once you turn something into an idea, into a mental image or a mental construct, we think, oh, that's it. But that's not the reality. There are things that you have to experience in your heart. And this is a completely different experience. I'll give you an analogy to help you do that, because you can either experience things in your head as an idea, for example, or you can experience things maybe as a taste. These are two different things. If you know someone who doesn't know anything about, let's say, any kind of, let's say a fruit, an exotic fruit, someone who's never tasted durian, for example. It's a tropical fruit, mainly in Southeast Asia. Durian. You're trying to describe the taste to someone who never tasted durian, right? And you describe it in detail, and they probably listen to you. Maybe they read a description, or they listen to many people who ate durian. Do you think this person, after listening to all of this information, after taking in all of this information, and these are all ideas, do you think this person really knows how durian tastes? 100% no. If you want this person to know what a durian tastes like, offer them durian and let them taste it. So that's a different device. Not everything can be reduced to a mental idea. Mental activity helps us simulate, helps us reduce things, codify things as in ideas, but it does not replace experiences. It's not a substitute for real experience. Let's say, for example, riding a bicycle, being balanced on a bicycle. You can read maybe thousands of pages on being balanced on a bicycle. You will still not be able to balance yourself on a bicycle unless you actually get on a bicycle and experiment and find the point of balance viscerally in your body, feel it in your body. That's how you, because it requires a different device. So knowing about balance is not like balancing, not like the experience of being balanced. So here we want to create a distinction between thinking and being. Thinking and being. The names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can process them as ideas, and it's important to learn them as ideas and understand their meanings and develop a mental construct of what a name of Allah or attribute of Allah, what that means. But that does not give you, that does not allow you to worship Allah through them. That alone does not allow you to worship Allah through them. This alone, merely understanding them as mental ideas, does not allow you to experience Allah and connect to Him at the level of the heart. Something else is required. And this is why we have to understand the difference between thinking and being. So thinking is in the head. Being here with spiritual phenomenon is actually in the heart. So this is why we're going to talk about what happens when we treat Allah's names and attributes as mere information, which is the dominant approach with most people. We think, yeah, I studied this book on the names and attributes of Allah. I took this class. I took all of these courses on the names and attributes of Allah. I can lecture about them. I can talk about them, and I can tell you about their meanings. I can explain the rules to you, right? All of that is okay and is good. But the real question, the real matter is, how do you experience those in your hearts, in your heart? Are you experiencing them as a person? Are you experiencing, is Allah present in your life? Is Allah a reality in your life, or is He just an idea? So you don't want to be stuck in your head. Learning about them is a very useful tool in terms of information. But if you are stuck with information, look at what happens. You can think about Allah, you can lecture about Allah, you can teach about Allah, but you do not experience Allah. Iman is more about experience. Knowledge feeds into this experience of Iman, but Iman itself is not knowledge. Is more than knowledge. It's more of a deeper experience in the heart. Allah becomes merely an idea, a mental thought. That's the problem. You will reduce Allah to an idea, and the problem with ideas, they are cold and distant. So you will start to experience in your own personal life Allah as being far away, so far from you, so distant. You will not experience what is called in Islam the ma'iyya of Allah, which is that Allah is with you, the fact that Allah is actually with you. And Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, when he speaks about the ma'iyya, meaning companionship of Allah, that He's with you, he says it is real. He says it is real. Some scholars say that it is Allah is with you in His sight and His hearing and in His knowledge. But Ibn Taymiyyah and many, probably the majority of Ahlus Sunnah, the scholars who are upon the Sunnah, they actually say that Allah is with you in reality. And this is something you can only know in your heart. You can only experience that in your heart. Just like the person can only know what or experience what a durian tastes like by actually tasting it and eating it. And the person cannot really find balance unless they experiment and they feel it in their body. You cannot possibly know Allah and experience His closeness and His nearness and His presence, His real presence, only by reading about Him or studying about Him. You have to allow the experience to come from the heart. So if you don't allow this to happen and Allah remains to you an intellectual subject of study, something else will happen other than feeling that Allah is distant and far from you. You'll start to think about Allah in mental images, and that's extremely serious. You start to think about Allah in mental images. So when you read, for example, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahman ala al-Arsh istawa, the most merciful, rose above the throne. If you don't, your heart knows what that means. There's no image, there's no mental image. There is a knowing in your heart. Your heart knows it and can relate to it. But if you do not engage with the names of Allah in your heart, you only keep that in your head as information, you start to develop a mental image, and that's inappropriate. That's inappropriate. You know, a man came to Imam Malik, rahimahullah, the Imam of Medina. He came to him and he said, Ya Imam, Ya Imam, Ar-Rahman ala al-Arsh istawa, kayfa istawa? He said, Ar-Rahman, the merciful, rose above the throne. How did he rise above the throne? In what manner? What did Imam Malik say? He said, Al-istiwa'u ma'lum. He said, the fact that Allah rose above the throne is known. Is known. Your heart knows that as a fact. Is known. And it's in the Quran, it's in Revelation. وَالْكَيْفُ مَجْهُولٌ. The how, which is the mental image, is not known to us. We don't have any mental image of that. The how, the description, which is a mental image, is not known. Why? Because this is not something you process in your head. This attribute of Allah is processed in your heart. It's from the world of the unseen. It's more of a spiritual fact. Spiritual facts cannot be processed in your brain. Your brain can only process physical phenomena, mathematical phenomena. It can process the creation, but not the creator. And it cannot process the angels. Your mind cannot process the angels. You cannot. In your heart, you know what the angels are. Your heart knows. So you will start to reduce Allah to a mental image, and then you will start creating mental images. And that's where what is called tamthil, tashbih, which is drawing parallels between Allah and His creation, or likening Allah to His creation. A'udhu billah. And that's the problem. And by the way, many people have this, even though they don't verbalize it. They don't speak about it. When you study Allah only as a mental idea, only as information, your mind, the way the mind works is by creating mental images. So if you limit that knowledge to your brain and you don't take it to your heart and get your heart to respond to it, your mind will struggle, will strive to find a mental image. This is how it pins things down. So you will start to create mental images of Allah being a Sami', Allah being al-Basir, Allah being the all-seer, the all-hearer, or Allah rose above the throne. You'll start to create mental images. Or Allah is above His creation, above the heavens. You start to create mental images, and that's extremely problematic. But when you engage with your heart, this doesn't happen. The heart knows. The fitrah, in your fitrah, you know how to relate to that. It's a state of knowing, and it's more profound, it's more compelling than any mental image. It is so profound. It is more compelling than a mental image. And this is why when you engage in the names and attributes of Allah, in your heart, your mind does not need to find mental images, because the profoundness of knowing Allah in your heart is sufficient, is more evident. Okay, so this is where we go wrong with understanding, or when we limit our relationship with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to being a mental construct. Now let's move on to talk about the heart's engagement with the divine names, and that's the heart of it. We want to connect to Allah through our hearts, and this is how we can personally experience Him personally. So what happens when we do that? The outcomes of this approach to the names and attributes of Allah is that you will experience Allah as a reality rather than as an idea. Allah will be a reality, more evident to you than perceptual reality. Allah will be more evident to you than even your realization or your perception that you have a hand. Allah will be more evident in your personal experience, not an idea, but a real personal experience. And you will relate to Allah without using mental images, just as a spiritual knowing. And that's what we just described. Your heart will relate to Allah, will connect to Allah, will know Allah, and you will feel no need to create mental images. The device or the tool you will use to connect with Allah is your heart. Most of us today are conditioned to primarily depend on our mind to connect to Allah. The mind cannot connect to Allah. It can only connect to ideas. The heart, which basically is the house of the soul, is the only connection we have with the world of the unseen. And that's why you find the heart is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The emphasis is on the heart, the heart, the heart. Never in the Quran you will find the mind or the brain being mentioned. Why? You will need to use it. You will need to use your mind. But the experience with Allah is in the heart. connection to the world of the unseen is in the heart. Okay, so what is another benefit here? Allah's reality becomes more compelling than perceptual reality. Again, when you allow yourself to experience Allah at a visceral level, at this heart, gut level in your soul, what will happen is that this experience becomes so compelling that it absorbs all of your attention most of the time. This is what happened with the man that we started this webinar with. You remember Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Farqad? He was praying, right? He was praying and it was nighttime and they heard the roaring sound. Probably a lion was approaching and everyone was hiding. But this person, the fact that his experience with Allah, that the presence of Allah in his experience was so real, it was more compelling than the serious danger of being devoured by a lion. It's not like this man was just imagining it. It's not like he was living in a fancy world. It's not like he was just being extra righteous. It's not the case. The reality is that this man had a very compelling engagement. This world of the names of Allah, when you experience it in your heart, is so compelling. It draws you in that you can't even pull away from it because of the beauty of the names of Allah. And when you experience them in your heart, is an overwhelming experience. So this is what this man was experiencing. He was there with Allah. And it was so, again, captivating that even a danger, a real life threat, seemed insignificant. Is this limited to such people? It's open to everyone. And this is how we are supposed to engage with the names and attributes of Allah. Why do you think the Prophet ﷺ would stand up in salah for most of the night until his heels cracked and were bleeding? And there was no pain. There was no experience of pain. The Prophet ﷺ was with Allah because it's so compelling, it's so sweet, it's so beautiful. Now, if you wonder why don't I experience that, is because we limit the names and attributes of Allah to our heads. We think they are just an idea, just process idea. You think the more information you absorb, the more you experience Allah, but that's not necessarily the case. If you limit that to an idea in your head, you're going about it the wrong way, or it's an incomplete story. You need to go further in that sense. And this is why, the great grandson of Ali bin Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu was called Ali Zain al-Abidin. He had gangrene in his foot, and the doctors said, we have to chop off your leg immediately, otherwise the gangrene would spread through your body quickly. We have to do that now. So he said, so what do I do with the pain of it? They said, we will give you a drink to intoxicate you, to numb you down. He said, no, I'm not going to drink an intoxicant. Then he thought and he said, okay, I have an idea. He said, let me stand up in prayer. And once I get into my salah, like really get into the zone, when I engage in my salah, you start sewing at my leg. You start, cutting it, cutting through it. And that's exactly what they did. He actually started his salah, and he was all in his salah, and they started sewing at his leg. And he didn't experience the pain. But eventually, because of the physical experience, he passed out. But he did not show any signs of pain. His body could not take it, but his heart was completely detached from that experience. That shows you when you connect to Allah in your heart, it's a very compelling experience. It pulls you in and it absorbs your attention. And it becomes a real experience. Imagine it like, or not imagine it, but think about it this way. It's like you enter another dimension and it's real. There is another dimension you enter in, and that's the dimension of the world of the unseen. Your heart is able to enter that. That's what's supposed to happen. But most of us do not allow ourselves to cross over into that. So when you connect to the names and attributes of Allah this way, you'll actually start to grow spiritually, and you will grow exponentially with that. And because most people, the way they think faith grows as information. And that's the problem. They think spiritually you grow with information. Information is a helpful tool and it can help, but it is not the real experience. It is just a useful tool. Okay, so in order to understand this, or understand how we go about this, we need to understand, what are humans? What are we? That's actually the biggest mistake. Or this is the I would say this is the root cause of why we do not engage with Allah, with the names of Allah, and engage with Allah Himself in the right way. Is because we don't understand ourselves properly. We actually misunderstand ourselves. We have a wrong idea about ourselves. Most of us think we are a brain and a body, and we think the soul only gives us energy to live. That's it. Like it's like electricity, as if the soul provides us with power, with electricity, and that's it. But all of our experience is defined by our brains and our bodies. And that's why we go about Allah as if we are computers, as if we are robots trying to deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a problem. So actually, I would say half of who we are is completely eliminated from that. And that's why we're not experiencing connection to Allah. So this is a very big topic, and this is something that in Rashidun, which is my personal project, inshallah, you will see, inshallah, in the future and in the upcoming year, inshallah, there will be some content and courses, inshallah, that I will actually start, offering more material on this and taking people deeper into this. This is the foundational concept there, is that we can live our lives that we have ignored more than half of who we are, and this is the soul. It's a real experience and has a lot of input into our own experience. So briefly here, I can only give you a glimpse here in this short time, is that we are, in brief, we have these two competing entities, either the nafs or the soul. And the soul, many times, by the way, it's referred to in the Quran as the heart. So the heart and the soul, pretty much, we're talking about the same thing. I'm saying pretty much, not exactly, but pretty much. When when you find heart in the Quran, it refers to the soul, and in the words of the Prophet ﷺ. So we have the soul. I would say the soul because the heart, again, some people understand it in an inaccurate way. So I would say the soul and the nafs. The nafs uses your intellectual brain, your mind. When you are overly using your ideas, your mind is mental constructs and ideas and information, and that's how you relate to the names and attributes of Allah, you're stuck more with the nafs. And thus Allah ends up being an idea. You reduce Allah to, again, a mental experience, a mental construct. Just like when you study, for example, let's say clouds, or you study water, or you study aircraft engineering. Allah just becomes just a content of your mind, nothing. Detached from your humanity, detached from your heart, detached from your soul. The mind it's important for the mind to absorb this information and learn it, but the real connection, the real engagement with the names of Allah happens in the heart, in our soul. The soul is a spiritual entity. The scholars say the soul is closer to the angels. So in a sense, in a very broad sense, you have an angel within you. And most of us have ignored that. This is where being is. This is where the concept of being is. Thinking is more with the nafs. Your being is more about your soul. You can actually anchor yourself in your soul. So you're either anchored in your nafs, which is mainly stuck in your head, or you can establish yourself and stand on the platform of the soul. And that allows you to look at life and experience life from a completely different vantage point. You experience Allah from a different point, completely like empowering place when you actually make a shift. And this is what the word yaqadha, an awakening, actually means. Many people think yaqadha is that you sort of shift to a new idea, a more refreshing idea. The reality of yaqadha is that you shift your being, your experience in life from your nafs to the soul. You start acting from the heart. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim calls this a migration. You have to make a migration from your nafs to your soul, to your heart. So you start living from there. Most people, again, because there's a lot of stimuli around us, there's a lot of distractions around us. Life is very busy. There's a lot of information coming our way. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of lights. There's so much around us. And all of that is activating our nafs and our brains to the point that most of us live through life unaware that you are essentially a soul. Essentially, you are a spiritual being. And again, this is something Imam al-Qayyim said. He said, you are made of a soul and a body, and you are supposed to align more with your soul. But most humans end up aligning more with their body to the negligence of their soul. You can only experience Allah personally when you are acting from your soul. You can only experience Allah. We have about 3 minutes, inshallah. I will conclude during this. So you can only experience Allah when you are established on the platform of the soul, not the normal state of functioning that most people find themselves in. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is just to take you over 3 verses quickly that show you that the experience is in the heart. And the heart and the soul, again, we said, sometimes refer to the same entity, the spiritual entity, which is who we are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the believers in Surah Al-Anfal at the beginning that they are إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم, that when Allah is mentioned, their hearts tremble. There's an experience in the heart. That's the soul. That's the heart. That's where you experience Allah, in your chest, not in your head. Another verse in Surah Al-Ra'd, Allah says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. They are the ones who have believed and their hearts find stillness, peace and tranquility in the mention of the name of Allah, in the remembrance of Allah. That tells you that this is a spiritual experience, by the way. Your heart feels the calmness, the peace, and it quiets your mind and it quiets your body. Another one is in Surah Al-An'am, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes even the very process of guidance. When Allah wants to guide someone, Allah says, Allah expands their chest. Chest is where the heart, Imam al-Qayyim says, the chest is the house of the heart. Your heart resides there. So there is something about the heart, something about the soul that has to do with the realities of Iman. It's not in the head where most of us assume. So I wanted to deal with 5 of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I wish I had more time, but I'm just going to go over them quickly. So we have an attribute of Allah called Al-Jamil. Came in a hadith, an authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Allah is beautiful and he loves beauty. Now, if you understand this in your head, Allah is beautiful, he loves beauty, fine. Yeah, an idea, you understood it, and you move on. But if you experience beauty in your heart, and by the way, beauty is essentially a spiritual concept. What appreciates beauty is your heart more than your mind. It's your heart. It's a spiritual phenomenon. This is why you find artists usually have a spiritual side to them. Whether they are believers or non-believers, they still engage spiritually. And a lot of the great works of art still come from a spiritual content that is unfortunately, contaminated with other things, but it has a very profound spiritual component. When you experience Allah in your heart as beautiful, you'll actually start to search for beauty as a message from Allah, as a reflection of the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You start to experience Islam, not only physical beauty, you start to experience the beauty in Islam itself. You start to you see the Salah as a very beautiful masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. You start to experience the instructions of Allah as so beautiful, and you'll be captivated by this beauty. And then you will trace it back to the beauty of Allah. You'll start to appreciate beauty in your life, beauty of your character, beauty of your speech, beauty even of the way you dress up, the beauty of your house, the beauty, not necessarily extravagance and luxury, but we're talking about beauty and neatness. So it becomes a worship. Beauty becomes a channel for worship. So that's in brief. And 2 of the names of Allah, let me mention the 4. Al-awwal wal-akhir, the first and the last. Al-zahir wal-batin, because these came in one verse. The uppermost and the innermost. Ibn al-Qayyim, he says these are foundational names of Allah. He says if you understand them and you embody them, absorb them in your heart, he says you can actually relate to Allah in a very profound way. So al-awwal, meaning he's the first. Many people think, and let me give you an example of when you process that only mentally. Al-awwal wal-akhir, yeah, he's infinite. He was there before everyone. He's going to be there after everyone. That's how your mind thinks about it. But al-awwal wal-akhir, you start to develop a sense of belonging. You came from Allah, and Allah is home for you. And Allah is al-akhir, your return is going to be with Allah. He's going to be your returning place. That's where you're going to go back to Allah. So you start to develop a sense of belonging to Allah, that you actually belong to Allah. You start to identify yourself. This is how you experience it in your heart. You'll identify yourself as someone who belongs to Allah. And you will take pride in that. You will take so much joy in knowing that you actually belong to Allah and that you came from Him and you will go back to Him. That's al-awwal wal-akhir. Then you will start to look at everything in your life. Al-awwal wal-akhir means the initiator and the terminator. It also means, and you can't figure this out only intellectually, initiator, everything in your life is initiated by Allah, including your life itself. And the terminator, everything is going to end up being with Him. So you need, so that's qadar, that's the fact. Things come from Allah and return back to Allah. Now you can worship Allah through al-awwal wal-akhir, and that's basically by seeing that even when you engage in an act of worship, you realize it's Allah who initiated that in you, the worship. You think, oh, I came up with the idea to pray. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired you. That's al-awwal. And He inspired you to do what? To offer Him something. That means it's going to return to Him, end up with Him. That's al-akhir, terminator, or where everything ends up. So that's just a small glimpse on this al-awwal wal-akhir. Al-zahir wal-batin is the uppermost. Allah is above His creation. He Himself is above His creation, and He is greater than His creation, and He is dominant over His creation. And al-batin, meaning what? The innermost, closer. So Allah is uppermost and innermost. This is where you experience Allah as qareeb, as close to you. You experience him in your heart, that He's closer to you than yourself. Let's say from in, I'm going to create a word, the inness of Allah. The inness of Allah is deeper than the inness of yourself, to yourself. So you don't deal with Allah as only al-zahir, who is above His creation, when your mind suggests He's far. No, when you understand that in your heart, you know He is al-qahir, He is dominant, He's above His creation because of His nobility and His status. And you also fear in your heart His nearness and closeness, that He is with you. He's closer to you than yourself. And this is real closeness, not just an idea in your head. When you allow yourself to delve into this and experience it, you will start to feel the intimate relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't want to spend time with other than Allah. You don't want any distraction to take you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Imam al-Qayyim, he says, if you manage to worship Allah through these al-awwal wal-akhir, al-zahir wal-batin, he says your ubudiyyah could reach a very high level. And this is something, inshallah, that we actually intend to expound on in the course, because we're going to talk about these names, because they are very profound. Okay, so with this, alhamdulillah, we have come to the end of this webinar. And now we can deal with the questions. I'll be very happy to actually deal with your questions. So I'm going to change the screen to full screen. And I'm not sure how I'm going to get your questions. Yeah, I'll leave that to Adnan. Go ahead, Adnan.
Jazakumullahu khairan, Sheikh. Jazakumullahu khairan to everybody as well for patiently attending. So you can post your questions in the chat. In your chat group, please brothers, keep your mics muted. So in your chat group, in your chat box, you will have two options. You will have an option to send a message to me privately, or you will have an option to send the message to everyone. So select everyone and post your questions for the Sheikh there. For anything else, for any inquiries or questions about the upcoming course or anything else, or comments and feedbacks, direct them to me. And in the chat box to everyone, post your questions for Sheikh Moutasem. And Sheikh, you will be able to see everybody's questions in the chat box there, except for one question which a sister requested that I will privately message you to keep the identity private. And if anybody else has a similar request where they want to maintain their identity private, they can direct those questions to me, and I will forward it to Sheikh. Sheikh, you will get them in the same chat box. It will just say these messages are from me private.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan. So I'll start looking at the questions in the chat area, and I will start answering them. Please, I apologize at the beginning, because just realize that I don't have time, so I'll give very, very brief answers. So it might not do justice to the question, but again, this is just a very brief, I would say maybe just a hint or a clue about where the answer could actually be. Okay, Bismillah. So we have Sister Samiha here. We agree to the fact that Allah is the best of planners, but when we see something that happens, you see negativity, you believe Allah is doing what is right, but there is waswasa of why and maybe how of why. So how do you connect to your heart and mind? That's actually a good question. Waswasa comes from your mind overthinking, trying to process or over process, the names of Allah or events in your life and trying to over process how they connect you, or what's the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the qadr of Allah. So waswasa is in your head. How do you get to your heart? Again, this requires a lecture in itself, and we're actually going to talk about that in the course. But in brief, I would say, turn your attention to your heart and be helpless. Turn to Allah and make dua and feel it in your heart. Oh Allah, please help me. And don't put a time limit on Allah. Don't put a time frame. Just maybe Allah wants to hear your voice. Just feel helpless, completely helpless, and that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can show you. This is the briefest I can give you. There's more we can do, but it requires a lot of explanation, and I want to take as many questions as possible. So we have here Sister Nazira says, Sheikh, your upcoming course on Allah's names and attributes, does it cover all 99 names? No, it doesn't cover all 99 names. That would take a very, very long course. But we're dividing the names and attributes of Allah into groups, clusters. So we will go over a good number, I believe. Maybe, I'm just throwing a rough number, but a rough estimation. Maybe half of the 99 names of Allah, or around that, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more. That's just a random number. Yeah. But we will deal with them as clusters, as groups, rather than individually, because this is the best way actually to relate to the names and attributes of Allah. Okay, Sister Khadija Wasim here. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Thank you for the class. So implying that even the beauty that we witness is a mercy of Allah to allow us to appreciate His beauty. Yes, definitely. Beauty is a divine concept, is divine gift. Unfortunately, we Muslims sometimes, in our cultural way of thinking, we want to treat beauty as always for those people who are not good, people who are for the artists who are doing bad things. We don't realize that this concept of beauty, as believers, we have the most right to it. We have the most, because it's a divine concept. It's a divine description. Yeah, it's a divine quality. Okay, so I believe Brother Rafi here. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Is Rabb is one of Allah's names? We usually hear that in Quran, but I didn't get the course of Allah's names. Yeah, Al-Rabb could be considered to be one of the names of Allah, Al-Rabb, because the Prophet ﷺ says in hadith, he refers to Allah in I can't remember the wording of the hadith, but Al-Rabb, or Rabbul Alameen. So it's one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, definitely. Okay, seems to be more questions. So we have here Ishmael Muhammad Adnan. Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. Could we get a lecture on nafs only in depth and how to deal with the waswasa of it? This is something that inshallah, and maybe Brother Adnan will inform you about this towards the end, that this is something actually this is the focus of Rashidun, really. And this is something I've been working on in terms of content, in terms of even like learning as a personal experience for more than 15 years. So inshallah, we intend to put this kind of experience, these kind of, whatever I've learned throughout this long-term experience, inshallah, put it through Rashidun, inshallah. So there will be upcoming courses and programs, bi'idhnillah, and Brother Adnan maybe can, inshallah, update you on this towards the end. Okay. So here's a question, seems to me private. Okay. If we don't feel inspired to pray, does that mean Allah does not want to hear from us? if it's Allah who inspires us to pray. This is a clear example of how the mind takes over. When you push the heart out and you pray only in ideas and thoughts, the mind works on survival. The mind works on survival. It also all the time, it has evil suspicion. It's going to bring you the worst explanation of any situation. So why does the mind do this? Because it thrives on negativity and critical thinking. It wants something to chew on. And shaitan feeds into this, so it becomes more negative. So when you think, oh, the reason I'm not feeling the prayer, maybe because Allah doesn't want me to feel it, Allah doesn't like me, right? So this is your mind overthinking, pushing away your heart, making you more miserable. And by this, you actually infringing on the rights of Allah by attributing something to Allah that you don't know to be true. In a sense, it's a lie against Allah, and you have swallowed that. And then it appears in the form of a victim. You know, maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe Allah doesn't like me, right? This is your nafs playing games on you. So when you stand in the prayer, let Allah lead the way. Be helpless. Don't interpret. Don't make judgment. Nothing. Just be there in your heart. Just bring your heart there and keep going at it, even if it takes months and months without you feeling anything. That dedication is your sincerity. And that's all you need now. Honestly, that's all you need now. Just want Allah. You must want Allah so badly and nothing else. And don't make a judgment. Don't arrive at conclusions. Just be there in front of Allah. Bring yourself to Allah without any other thing. That's it. That would be a great achievement, and you will see how things will change. Okay. So we have Brother Hamad Ansari here, says, Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khair. Can I ask if any of these videos will be available in recorded form? Still, I'm not always available to listen to a class. Okay, yeah, I believe Brother Adnan will update you on this as well, that the class will be available for some period of time. I'm not sure how long. For those, this webinar will be available, inshallah, for everyone. But the classes, for those who register for the class, the videos of the class will be available afterwards for those who registered. I'm not sure of the details. Brother Adnan will tell you, inshallah. So I'll take two more questions, and I apologize. I don't want to keep you more than that. Maybe we can deal with some questions during the course, inshallah, if we get some time. So Brother Samir Zaman says, Assalamu alaikum Shaykh, wa alaikum salam. Thank you for the initiative. If Allah has preordained our decree, then why are we individuals responsible for our deeds? This question was asked to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and again, I'm glad you asked this question, because this is another example of how the mind, your thinking, right, infringes on the rights of Allah, or tries to liken Allah to his creation. And again, I'm not accusing the brother. We all do this, by the way. We all have this element inside of us. So it's good you bring it out and get it answered. There is an assumption in this question, which the mind has, that when Allah preordains, or when Allah writes down the qadar, or the destiny of the creation, that Allah does that like we do, right? That I write things, oh, this is the script, you guys have to follow it. Let's say you're a writer for a film, right? Okay, actors have to follow this script. This is how humans preordain or write scripts. That's not how Allah writes scripts. Allah writes scripts because he knows what's going to happen. So Allah knows what every one of us Allah knew what every one of us was going to do. What is the essence of every one of us? How we were going to behave? What was going to come out of us? What is our essence? Allah knows. How are we going to unfold? Allah knew that. So he wrote that down. So it's not like, again, so that's it. When we understand Allah only in our ideas, we're going to arrive at problematic conclusions like this. But when we understand Allah in our hearts, the way the heart relates to this, the hearts rest in peace and stillness that Allah is wise, fair, just, and Allah is the all-knowing, and Allah wants good for His creation, and Allah facilitates good for His creation, and Allah brings even more good to His creation than they ever deserve. And I go through life like this, expressing my love of Allah and my quest for closeness to Allah and my connection to Allah. This is how I live my life, and I know Allah will take care of me. That's how the heart goes through life. But it's the mind now. I want to know how this happened. I want to know what's going to happen after this. So if this is the case, why is this happening? That's the mind overthinking, trying to play God. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ, this is why Umar ibn Khattab, when someone was asking about the names and attributes of Allah, his name was Subayq or Sabir ibn Usul, he asked questions the companions never asked. Why didn't they ask? Wasn't like they were not intelligent? That's what happened with subsequent generations. They thought the companions were not intelligent enough to ask complex questions about Allah or complicated questions about Allah. No, the companions related to Allah in their hearts through that knowing. So their experience with Allah was mainly in the heart. So the mind found no need to get engaged in asking silly questions. Subsequent generations did not have that profound experience in the heart. They started, over-processing things in their head, so ended up asking all of these weird questions that led to a lot of misguidance in terms of aqidah and belief. Okay. One question, inshallah, then we'll conclude. We went over time. Brother Ijaz, whomever Allah wills, He leaves astray. Whoever Allah wills, He puts him on a straight path. What is my fault then if I am? Well, we answered that. You're assuming that Allah is a human being, and this is how He basically makes things happen. But we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He writes based on He preordains things based on His knowledge and His wisdom and His justice. So we are responsible for our creations, and we actually, we create our creations. Allah, okay, there's more details, but again, that's the basic answer. This was brief. Let me take Gulaid's question. Would it be correct to say that studying Aqidah is from the ala for a person to develop his deep relationship with Allah and His names and attributes? Yes, the technicalities of the study of Aqidah are called ulum al-ala. Ulum al-ala means these are helping sciences, like they scaffold the knowledge. They give you tools to understand, right? So yeah, engaging with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is learning these rules at intellectual level, but we shouldn't stop there. The real experience, again, I said, Allah should be experienced via our hearts. Okay, Jazakumullah khairan for your attendance, your time, and we have to leave this, have to hand it over to Brother Adnan to conclude. Inshallah, I'll give you some updates. I really appreciate your time, and I hope, inshallah, I will see you in the upcoming course, because we're going to discuss all of that and much more, inshallah, in more detail, and we will have more time for questions. Jazakumullah khair, wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakumullahu khairan, Sheikh Moutasem. Jazakumullahu khairan, everybody, for participating, for joining. A few updates. I just posted 2 links in the group chat. One is a feedback form. I understand some of the questions did not get answered, and we would also love to collect your feedback to continuously improve your learning experience. So please access that feedback form. You can anonymously share your feedback. Your email address will be required, but you don't have to write down your name if you don't like to. And in that feedback form, you can also type in any questions that got missed during this webinar. And inshallah, we will try to address those questions in the upcoming course that starts on November 28th, 9 a.m. Pacific time or 12 p.m. Eastern time. Or we will cover those questions in the upcoming various different programs. Inshallah, we have a lot in planning, and we will keep everyone updated. Also, on that feedback form, we would love to get a confirmation from you whether we can send you some emails about upcoming programs by Sheikh Moutasem. So please indicate your preference and we will keep you updated accordingly. The link to this YouTube video, this video was streamed live on YouTube, and it will be on YouTube with no time limit. So you can access it whenever, and you can share it with your friends and families. As far as the recordings of the sessions from the course starting next weekend, it will only be available to those who register. And inshallah, our intention is that they will have lifetime access to those recordings. So please do register if you wish to join the course. I understand some of you may not be able to join in due to time difference, but if you register, you will have access to those recordings. Sheikh, we had a question about the course, and one of the sisters is asking if the upcoming course on the names and attributes of Allah, would you recommend it for non-Muslims and also new Muslims who may not be very familiar with Arabic terminologies? I will let you answer that question.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan. It can work, inshallah. I think as long as they have a very basic knowledge of who Allah is and who Prophet Muhammad is, inshallah they will be able. And it's a point, inshallah. My point is to make this knowledge, again, it's not technically very complicated. Again, information will be mentioned, but the emphasis is on helping every participant in the class really arrive at this place of engaging with the names of Allah at a personal level. So a new Muslim or someone doesn't have very good Islamic awareness, I would say, inshallah it can actually work for them, because I'll be using terminology, but I always translate that and I use synonyms as well. So they can still relate to that. They don't have to understand everything being said, but pretty much they will be able to understand, the gist of the material, and they will be able to relate to the experience itself. And the names of Allah are actually quite intuitive. They are part of our fitrah, and they come to us easily, but we make them complicated when we just try to, again, intellectualize and go overboard with understanding logically and dissecting and rationalizing. But the reality is, they are very close to the heart. They come to each one. They come to us very naturally. So, inshallah, it will be helpful to them, bi'idhnillah.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. Finally, I think with that we conclude our event. Once again, I will post the link to the feedback form, and please, everybody, I would appreciate your feedbacks on it. And Jazakumullah khairan once again. Have a great day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.